Hello and welcome to another episode of Beyond the Pod. I am Brandon Mileski, Pat Micheletti, former Golden Gopher great with me. And Beyond the Pod is brought to you by Soda Stick, and we have a brand new sponsor called Gather Well, and we'll be learning more about them in a little bit. Pat, hi, how are you doing?
Good to see you, Brandon. And before we start, I want to give a shout out to my good friends, the Rosemount, excuse me.
Yeah.
Pee Wee A team, Double A. I spoke to their team the other night. Their head coach, former North Dakota, he was a Sioux at the time, Lee Gorin, who was a great player in his own right, and Matt Fyan, who was their manager, invited me to talk to the team and kind of, give them some tips and pump them up. It's been a tough year, and I had a great time. And I tell you what, it was so fun to speak to those kids and get their perspective and thoughts and offer advice. And I tell you, every one of them after we were done sent me an email thanking me, and what great kids and really good leadership over there. So thank you guys for having me.
And I imagine I can't gamble on Pee Wee Double A.
Yeah,
but if I could, I would bet on Rosemount the rest of the way after you talk with them. I have to think they were just inspired.
Well, I think they're smarter, and of course, Brandon.
Well, speaking of smarter, I want a smart Micheletti on this podcast.
Too. Finally, we get one.
So we decided to get a hold of your brother Joe, who is joining us live on the East Coast. Joe, thank you for your time today. Really appreciate it. We have lots we want to get into. Obviously, we always want to talk NHL with you. We want to talk about your Gopher career, because it's 100 years of Gopher hockey we're celebrating this season, and your NHL career. But first question I want to ask you is, because every time we have you on, we only talk about basically what's going on in the National Hockey League. I want to know about Pat as a child. Now, I know there's a 10-year age gap, so maybe you weren't as too close to him when you guys were younger. But
we were.
Can you tell me a hopefully funny and embarrassing story about Pat when he was a child?
He wouldn't do that to me.
Oh boy, how much time do we have?
Yeah,
plenty of time.
Yeah, we do.
All, it's great. It's great to be with you guys, and happy holidays to everybody out there.
You as well.
Everybody staying as safe and as well as they can in these tough times. So, boy, oh boy. All right, I'll just tell you one. So, of course, Pat was the 9th child, right?
Yes.
And so
the golden one.
First 6 were boys. The golden one in his own eyes. The first 6 were boys.
And mothers.
Then our 2 sisters, and then Pat. All right.
Yep.
And Pat was the baby of the family, and he lived
9
up to
times
that.
To get it right.
He lived up to that when he was at home, not when he was on the ice, but when he was at home, to the point where he was spoiled so badly.
That makes sense.
Never had a new
by our mother.
Nah.
And who would ever hear of someone ironing your underwear?
Yep.
My mother, God rest her soul, my mother,
I had to set a standard.
Our mother ironed his underwear for him.
What?
That's how spoiled he was. So
I
don't know what to say after that.
I had a high standard. I had a high standard. And Brandon, and my mom, you always used to tell me it took 9 times to get it right. And here I am, Brandon. Here I am.
Well, what was Joe like as a big brother then? Obviously,
he was fantastic. He was fantastic. We, I learned all of my athletic traits from Joe and Don, who were my 2 brothers ahead of me. Whether it be shooting hoops or playing soccer in the front yard or wiffle ball or, whatever we did. I mean, they drove my drive to be competitive and taught me everything that I know. So I was lucky to have Joe and Don and the rest of my brothers to help out, and it was great.
Well, we were lucky to have each other, and
yep.
One of my great thrills, and Pat, because of our age difference, you and I never had a chance to play in the same team, but one of my great thrills that to this day that I've ever had in life was being a teammate with brother Don.
Yeah.
Who, you were the best out of the 3. Don, I think, would have been the best pro.
Yeah, no doubt.
and he was a heck of a player. And when you talk about power forward, toughness, could score, had this edge to him on the ice, and he unfortunately hurt his knee, and that thing, he was drafted by the Capitals, and it's too bad he didn't get that opportunity, because I think he would have had a long career in the NHL. But it was one of my great thrills just to play with him and be with him, and it was so much fun. I mean, you mentioned me, and then I had brothers Tom, Jim, Andy, Jerry to help me along.
Right.
They were all great athletes and people in their own right. So we were blessed. I guess that's the best way to look at it.
Well, Joe, I want to go back, to your high school career, and then when you went to the university. If people don't know, Joe had 8 goals, 3 assists in the 1973 state tournament to win the championship. And I mean, that feat right there was unbelievable. What was that feeling like?
Well, it was a really interesting year, because we were favored early on in the season to be one of the best teams in the state, and that was at a time when they only had the 18 yes, and so we had a great start. We were undefeated and rated number 1 in the state up until the last 3 games of the regular season. We lost all 3 games.
Right.
And then, all hell broke loose. Our coaches were going crazy, and we had lost our confidence. And our first game in the playoffs, we snuck by with a win. And then we got beat. We got hammered by International Falls in our
Section
final.
5.
And then we had to get in through District 8. So, and then to get there, we had a really tough game. Our first game with Bemidji, and they were so competitive. And Chuck Grillo was the head coach, and
right.
He and I to this day are still good friends, and we established that relationship after our high school. And he was the head baseball coach too for Bemidji. So we competed against each other on a regular basis, but that was a tough game for us, and we won 4-2, and that kind of got us going. And then we had this setup with International Falls in the semifinals, who had just kicked us around a couple of weeks earlier, and so we were fired up. We were determined to prove something, and we ended up beating them 5-4, holding on. We were up 5-2, and they came back and then to win the championship like we did. But we had such a good team and a good team of athletes, and so many of us had grown up together.
Right.
Played word hockey and peewee hockey and bantam hockey, and then got to high school, and we knew each other so well, and it just it was just one of those magical times for our team, and that's how we did it. We had 3 good lines and a good group of defense, and our goaltender, Timmy Pogarels, who just recently passed away. We just kind of had one of those teams where we could beat you in a lot of different ways. And for me, it was just, I got lucky. It was, we all have those times as athletes when it just kind of happens at the right time. And some of it is just blind luck. And a lot of it was for me in that state tournament. So it was something I'll never forget. It was one of the greatest times of my life.
Okay, I'm going to take you. Well, I don't know if it was in 70, that winter of 72, and then into 73. And for the people who are out there don't know, Herb Brooks was very, very close to our family. But the first time I met him, and I don't know if that was the first time you met him, was when he came to our house, and I think Mom had a broken leg at the time, and you had a knee injury, I think, at that time, and Herbie had come to our house and was recruiting you, and he told you, well, if you come to Minnesota, I'm going to convert you from a forward to a defenseman. Talk about all of that and what you were thinking as a 18-year-old kid, being recruited by Minnesota and knowing that if you go there, you're going to have to change positions.
Well, Herb had, and there's so many stories, and most of them just fabulous about Herb and who he was and how he recruited and his coaching and you name it, his psychology. He was brilliant. And so the first time I met Herb, when he came to our house, excuse me, I didn't even talk to him.
Yeah.
I mean, I said hi, and he said, Joe, I just want to talk to your mom and dad.
I probably talked to him more than you did.
I sat in our kitchen. He sat in our living room with my mother and father for an hour, and talked to them about who he was and how he was going to take care of their son. And so then he finished up, and we had a brief chat, and that was it. And he left. Yeah. And I'm thinking, but what ended up happening is that night he became our mother and father's 10th child.
Yeah,
because
no doubt.
He did, because there was a love relationship between Herbie and our parents that lasted forever. Herbie, our father died first. He was 76 in the early 90s. And I remember Herbie calling me when that happened and saying, I'm sorry to hear about this, but I can't make it. I can't make it up there. So there's a typical Minnesota blizzard that happened to be the night of our father's wake. And it was typical, right? But he makes the drive, unbeknownst to us, from the cities to Hibbing, which generally is a 3.5 to 4 hour drive in good conditions. He comes walking in the middle of this wake and spent 2 hours with us, and then turned and drove back through the blizzard. Yeah, and when our mother passed away about 12 years after that, Herbie was working for Pittsburgh, the Penguins at the time. Yep. And I got a call from him. He was in Montreal, and he said, Joe, we just heard about your mom, and passed on his condolences and said, listen, I can't make it. I just started a 2-week scouting trip. I'm in Montreal. I just started a 2-week scouting trip for Pittsburgh, and we were getting close to the playoffs. And so he was out doing his work, and guess who shows up at her funeral?
Yeah,
him. And that was him. He was so tough on us as a coach, so fair with us, taught us so much, and again had this relationship with our mother and father, and as it turns out, became a brother to my brothers and sisters, and so he became part of our family. So that's a long story, but that was just one of the great things about Herbie.
Well, can you tell us about before we move on to your career at the University of Minnesota? Herb's kind of, I think for most of us, we think of the 1980 Olympics and the speeches and the psychology. Can you think of one moment at the University of Minnesota that's very memorable in terms of a speech or just something he did that just kind of blew your mind?
Well, there were so many, but one that really stands out, and I've been thinking about this, the 100-year anniversary of Gopher hockey, and to think at that time in the early 70s, there would maybe 2, 3, 4% of all players in the National Hockey League were U.S. born kids. Right. I mean, there was almost nobody playing, right, in the NHL. Even on the college scene, Denver was a perennial championship team, and Murray Williamson was a renowned head coach. Yep. But he would, most of the players on that team were Canadian, Yeah. He would recruit, but that was pretty standard for
the norm.
Most of the NCAA teams, or they would recruit in Canada. But I think it started with John Mariucci, and he passed this on to Herbie. And John played in the NHL and was one of the toughest players to ever play the game, a defenseman for the Blackhawks, and a wonderful guy, tough as they get.
Yep.
But had such a heart for the Minnesota kids.
Yep.
So when he recruited Herbie, and then when Herbie took over as coach, I mean, this was passed on. And of course, the great John Mayasich, maybe the greatest player ever, and come out of Minnesota. But they established something that, you know what, we're going to give these Minnesota kids a chance. And so when we won the national championship, my freshman year, 1970,
in Boston. Yep.
Boston. That team was all Minnesota kids.
Yeah.
First team to ever win a championship with all U.S. born kids. And when you think of that, I was thinking about that again this morning, the magnitude of that with what was against, and it wasn't planned. It was just the way hockey was. Most of the players were Canadians. Yep. They were considered the best players. And they were considered the players you had to recruit. And so as that freshman season went on, and I didn't start playing until, because as Pat mentioned, Herbie told me he was going to put me on defense. And of course, as I talked about Herbie's psychology, he'd say to me, you know why I'm making the change? And this is after the great state tournament I had playing center. And, and I kind of looked at him like, he said, my best athletes always play defense. That's why you're going to be back. And so
Pat.
Sold, right? So I was sold. So it took me half the season to learn how to skate backwards well enough to play. And that's so true. And
wow.
Herbie would work with me every day. Every day after practice, we do drills, backwards skating, circles, crossovers, you name it, every day. Until by Christmas time is when I played my first college game in St. Louis in the Christmas tournament that the St. Louis Billikens used to host. Is when I started playing regular, and then was lucky enough to have my first defense partner be Les Auger, who was, God rest his soul also.
Yeah.
But I was so lucky to be able to have him as a partner and then to learn. And as we continued to play, as that season went along, now we started getting good. And now we started getting better. And now we started getting confidence. And John Harris was our captain, our senior captain. And Robbie Harris was on that team. And we had, Tommy Vanelli, and Warren Miller and Pat Phippen. And these were all Minnesota kids right in the backyard of the University of Minnesota. And we start growing and we start going and we had, I can't remember the exact game, but it was not too far before the playoffs started. And Herbie came in after the game that we had just won. And he said, you know what? He said, you guys are a team of destiny. You are destined to win. You're destined. Remember that. And then away we went. Finished strong, got to Boston, beat Michigan Tech in the final. But I'll never forget that speech. He came around the room and he was you could just look in his eye and he was just telling you guys are a team of destiny. I can feel it. I hope you can. And away we went.
And
that was just one of the great, one of the great speeches from her.
Plug for our hometown. 3 kids from Hibbing on that team. Yourself, John Perpich, and Mike Polich, who was from Kelly Lake, a suburb of Hibbing. But 3 guys. I mean, that's pretty impressive right there.
Yeah, excuse me. They played such an important role in my life and in recruiting me.
Right.
John Perpich was the senior defenseman.
Yep.
His brother George and I had just finished playing on the same line.
Yep.
And winning the state high school championship together. George and I played on the same line since we were about 7 years old. We played on every team together, played on the same line together. Their brother Jimmy was another one, was a good player, was on our state high school championship team as well. So the Perpiches and the Michelettis, and of course the father was our high school coach. He was the head coach, and so the Perpiches and Michelettis had a friendship for years and years. And so John was one of the big reasons, why I went to Minnesota. Mike Polich, who was a heck of a hockey player, drafted by Montreal and played in their system, was another reason why I went there. And these two people, they had such great leadership. And I remember just talking to them, and they said, you should come and play. And I had an agreement with my parents at the time, because there was a number of schools that I was being recruited by. And we had agreed we're going to take our time, and we're going to go visit Denver, and we're going to go visit Colorado College, and we're going to go visit North Dakota, and there's some Michigan school. So I was going to go through that whole process before deciding. So Herbie, as we just talked about, had been to the house, 10 days before that. And I'm home alone one night about 7 o'clock. My parents were out for dinner. The telephone rings. I pick it up. It's Herbie. And Herbie says, and I'd already had these conversations with Mike Polich and John Perpich. And Herbie says, have you been giving any thought to, committing to us? And I said, yeah, but we kind of decided we're going to just, listen to the other teams. He said, okay, but I just want to tell you, he said, I got a lot of blue chip prospects that are waiting for me to just ask them to come here. So I don't want to put any pressure on you, but I got a lot of blue chip prospects, and Fisher was one of them who I just played against in the championship game in North Dakota as a defenseman. And Herbie said, so, don't, I said, okay, Herbie, I'll come. So that was it. I skipped all the other visits. My mother and father came home that night and said, anybody call? I said, yeah, I heard Brooks called, and I told him I was going to Minnesota. So that ended all that. But that was... the
psychology began right away, even before you were a gopher. By the way, Mike Polich was my squirt hockey coach at Osseo, and I played with I played with his two sons, Justin and Brandon, at Totino Grace High School. So I've got a connection to the Polich family. We'll get back to you one second here, Joe, but I want to let our listeners know about sodastick.com. You can get your original Minnesota sports inspired goods. If you haven't seen it yet, you got to check it out. Perfect for stocking stuffers for Christmas. All of their apparel is screen printed here in Minnesota on super soft, super comfy shirts and hoodies. You will love it. And we're going to hook you up with free shipping on your next order. Use the code KFAN for free shipping. That is sodastick.com, original Minnesota sports inspired goods. Use the code KFAN for free shipping. Joe, can you tell me about, these games all took place before I was alive, so I didn't know much about the history, but just reading up, you guys played Michigan Tech 3 years in the final. You beat them 2 of the 3 years. What was that rivalry like playing the same team for the whole thing 3 years in a row?
Oh, with Michigan Tech?
Yeah.
It was, it was fabulous. And then after that, when I turned pro and a guy by the name of Mike Zook turned pro, we turned pro together, and we had, we had a real rivalry, both as a team and then individually, because he and I were matched up against each other an awful lot. And Mike was a tough, kind of a dirty player. And so we were always, going, he had this knack that anytime you're going to come up to hit him, he always got his stick up high with his butt end out. So that always irritated me and everybody else. But that was a fabulous, fabulous rivalry. And we beat them 2 out of 3. And I think our best team was the year we lost to them in the final. And that was
St. Louis.
That was in St. Louis.
Yep.
And we had a fabulous season, but we peaked in March. And then we just, or February or so before we got to the playoffs, and we couldn't quite find it again. We had Paul Holmgren that played for us. We beat Harvard the first game.
He knocked a guy out, didn't he? One punch.
Yeah, he did the goalie, in fact. He hit the goalie, and somebody came up, and Homer just, hammered him with one shot. Down he went.
Yeah.
But it was I think I just think that was our best overall team. And we ended up losing to Michigan Tech. And then the following year was a year where Pat Phippen scored in triple overtime to get us to the finals at Michigan State. Michigan State was the number one team in the country. We struggled all season because we lost so many good players after my sophomore year. And so it was a struggle for us, but we kind of found our game. Reed Larson, found his game. He was a big part of it. And so it was late in the season when we were able to get something going. And we were the third seed, so we had to go on the road. And at that time, it was total goals,
Right.
2-game series, total goals. And we ended up tying the first game, and then we were up 6-2 going into the in the second game. And we took a couple of major penalties, and they had a great team with just some terrific players. And so we ended up 6-6, and then Pat Phippen scores in triple overtime. And we're actually, it was funny, the overtimes, we're in our locker, we were actually laughing. We're feet up, and we're just, people say, was there pressure? You guys nerve? And we were just laughing about it. We were saying, we're going to win. We're going to win.
Well,
let's just stay with it. And Pat Phippen, got the job done for us. And then when we got to Denver for the national championship, we actually trailed 3-0 in the first period to Michigan Tech. And then we started this comeback, and I believe we beat them 6-3. So it was a fabulous rivalry with them.
Yeah. And I'm going to go back to that. I know you're humble, but you were the one who took the shot from the left point that either the goalie stopped and Phippen knocked it in, or you gave the pass, but it originated from your shot for the game winner.
I had the greatest shot in the history of college hockey. I don't know if anybody has said that yet.
Okay.
Well, I'll tell you what. You go back to that game.
Yep.
And there's it's never one play. I mean, sometimes I think the only player that can win a game for you is your goalie, right? Other than that, one player can have a great game, but it's never just one player. And besides, our goalie then coming up, Tommy Vannelli, if I remember right, I think Tommy Vannelli had a 5-assist game.
Jeez.
In that one. I think he had 5 assists. So, you think about somebody like Tommy. We were recruited together, and we lived together our freshman year, and then we lived together our junior or senior year, our junior year. Yeah, my senior year, I lived upstairs a Stubborn Herb, so I don't even know how he's still alive. But Tommy, never a big physical, not big physically, but he had a heart as big as Williams Arena. Yeah, and would do anything to win. And I think he had 5 assists that game.
Wow.
So you can go right on down the list. Warren Miller, tough as nails, could play any style you wanted. Pat Phippen, and we just Russ Anderson, and we just had a real collection of really solid players and people.
Well,
Joe,
listen, in that championship game against Michigan Tech in Denver, the semifinal game, Brandon, there was a bench clearing brawl,
right?
With Boston University,
right?
Well, then what happens is a couple of the guys get kicked out, can't play in the final. One of them being Jim Boo, and the other being Russ Anderson.
Right.
I was about so high, right?
Yeah.
And so I sat with them right on the glass for the championship game. Right. And Russ Anderson I think started out playing football at the U, Joe.
Did.
Or could have. They just, I sat in between them, and they said, "Go ahead, say whatever you want. We got you." So that was a blast. Watching the final game.
I think you came on the ice when we won it with Russ.
Probably. Of course.
Yeah.
Then I spent the whole night with you guys at the hotel. Mom and Dad were not happy. With them.
They shouldn't have been.
No.
Joe, I can't tell you how weird it is to talk to a humble Micheletti right now. This is kind of blowing my mind a little bit. Let's talk about your transition then away from college. So, because of my age, I never got to see the WHA. You were drafted by both the NHL, the Canadians, and in the WHA. So, what were kind of the differences between the two leagues? How do they compare, and what went into your decision on which route you went?
Well, the decision was easy because I was drafted by Montreal.
Yep.
And I didn't know until I received a phone call. I guess the draft was in June, and it was not nearly as publicized as it is now. And so I get a phone call from Herbie's secretary, and she said, "Can you come over to the office? Herbie wants to talk to you. Can you come over this afternoon?" I said, "Yeah, sure. What am I going to say? No." So I go over to Herbie's office, and I walk in, and he said, "Listen." So this was after my freshman season. So he said, "I just want to tell you, the Montreal Canadiens drafted you in the whatever." Is that what it was?
Yep.
But I was like their 15th player because they had so many number 1 picks and all this. And so anyway, so he said, "I just want to let you know," but he said, "Don't even worry about it. You're not good enough to play anyway, and you never will." and I said, "Okay."
Great.
I said, "Okay, thanks." I turned and walked out. I mean, it was about, excuse me, it was about 3 minutes. And so that's how I found out. So anyway, at the time, now fast forward, now I'm a senior, and things had worked out a little bit better than Herbie thought, or he knew all the time, or whatever it was. And I was drafted in the World Hockey. So I got an offer from both franchises, and with Montreal, they had just finished, or they were in the midst of winning their 4 consecutive Stanley Cups. Yeah. And so on defense, they had Larry Robinson and Guy Lapointe and Rick Chartra and
Serge Savard, right?
Serge Savard, and they had all these Hall of Famers. Yep. And Bill Nyrop.
Yeah.
Bill Nyrop, a Minnesota kid who had a fabulous career in Montreal and died too young as well. But so they offered me what was called a 2-way contract. $75,000 to play if I made the big team, and then I think $20,000 or $25,000 if I was going to play in the minors, which that's where I would have been forever. And I had a 1-way offer to sign with the Calgary Cowboys on a 2-year contract. They gave me a little signing bonus up front, but to me it was a chance to play and try and prove that I could play. And I didn't think I was going to get that chance with Montreal. So that's how it happened. And Glenn Sather, as it turns out, my Calgary folded after my first year. I played 22 or 26 games for them because I left right after the college season. And then they folded in the summer. I ended up in Edmonton, where Glenn Sather was our coach and general manager. And then Wayne came along, and but it just gave me an opportunity to play against pro players, to see where I was with my career, and it was the right thing to do.
And then when Gretzky came, now you're mostly defense, but for a while you moved up to wing with Edmonton, at least for a short time.
Yeah.
And your center happened to be Wayne Gretzky.
Off and on. Yeah, it was either, so I got bounced around.
Right.
Both Glenn was putting me on defense and would play up front, and I played with Wayne a little bit. I played with Ron Chipperfield.
Yeah.
Cowboy Flett was our right wing.
Yeah.
And so it was pretty. Again, the social media. most Canadians knew more about Wayne Gretzky than the rest of us.
Yep.
And we had played against him once when he played for the Indianapolis Racers. And, the kid's 17 years old, right? Didn't have a hint of a muscle on his body and broke and set all these records playing junior hockey and was, the next one. And we played him that first game, and Steve Carlson was on our team.
Yeah.
From
Virginia.
from slap shot fame. And Steve was a good player, and he played with an edge. And so, we weren't gonna let this 17-year-old, beat us. And so it was in Indianapolis, and so we played against him. We played him tight. He was still trying to find his way, and then the next thing you know, he ends up on our team. And we used to play these games, move the nets in after practice between the blue lines and play 2-on-2 or 3-on-3. And then you go, boy, oh boy. Now we know why this guy was so hyped. And it was such a pleasure. And he was so good at age 17 and 18 with the press and because he had faced it, since he was just a young kid.
Yeah.
And he's not much different now than he was then. Despite all his greatness and everything he's done in his career or did in his career. The person he was back then is about the same as now than he was then. So it was fabulous time.
Did you know that year, just the 1 year he played with them when he was a rookie at, putting 100 points up at the age of 18? Did you know then he is going to be the greatest player ever to play in the league?
You broke up there.
Oh, I was just saying, he had 100 points at the age of 18 the year you played with him. Did you know when he's an 18-year-old that this is going to be the greatest hockey player that ever played?
Yeah. Well, I know I wouldn't say that because Bobby Orr was my guy.
Yeah.
Growing up, and he was my guy. There's still an argument who the greatest player ever was, and that's depends on when you grew up and how you grew up, and so Bobby Orr was always my guy. And I mean, we could spend another half hour just talking about Bobby and how he's we've become friends, and some of the things that he's done. You talk about one of the great people and things that people don't know about that he's done. And I'll give you we have time, right? So I'll give you a quick story, and then I'll try. So I'll answer the Gretzky question first. So the answer was no. Nobody knew he was going to do what he did, but when you saw him at that age, and then the way that teams would take runs at him, and that's when Glenn went out and got Dave Semenko and played, the toughness that I showed playing as left wing wasn't quite what Dave and so Wayne then started playing a lot with Dave Semenko on his left side, and that just stopped teams from taking runs at him. And the game's played a lot different now than it was then. And so that even allowed Wayne a little bit more room and a little bit more time, which he didn't need anyway. But, you can imagine what happened when that became that way. And so we knew that the kid, because he could do things that you always say, how did he know to be over there? How did he know the puck was going to end up there? Everybody thought it was going this way, and he's over there. And how do you know that? Or is it just lucky that he happened to be there when the puck comes back? And obviously it wasn't, because he did it for 20 years. But nobody else could do that. So you started to see those things, and they started to become commonplace. And then you just start going, oh, okay, I kind of get it now. And so anyway, I didn't know he'd be 1,000 points ahead of the second highest scorer in the league.
Yeah.
And but just a quick story on Bobby Orr. So I got to know Bobby when I started broadcasting, and I used to have a radio show. I did about 5 hours of radio a week in St. Louis when I was there, and I had Bobby on he was kind enough to come on a couple of times and it would just go for half an hour, and he was just fabulous. And I used to hear stories about Bobby and the way he treated people. And he would do, and still does to this day, he would do so many things at hospitals for kids. Nobody, and he'd make sure that there wouldn't be any cameras there. Nowadays you see, not all the time, but a lot of times you see,
Right.
There's always a camera, and it's always going to be televised, and it's always going to,
Yeah.
And I don't mean to take away from what these guys do, but one of the things that Bobby always did was, you'd see him on camera, but there were so many other things that he did for people that he would just hear about and go to their house and do things like that. The great Bobby Orr, and nobody would know about it. So about 3 years ago, it was about 3 years ago. So I'd always see Bobby when we would go to Florida and play the Panthers,
Right.
because he lives down in Florida in the winter, and he's an agent, and so there were a few players on the Rangers that he represented, and so I'd always see him, and we'd have time to give each other a hug and talk a little bit down by the locker rooms before the game. And so a few years ago, we had the schedule just kind of worked out where our brother Jerry was a decorated military guy, graduated from the Air Force Academy, had a fabulous career, had just retired, bought a place down in Florida about an hour from Tampa, retired there. And so the schedule worked out where I had a chance to go down a day early, go see him, spend a night with him, see his new place, gave me a tour of his new house. And so as we're walking around, we get to his office, and inside his office, he's got all these awards. He was the captain of the hockey team his senior year at the Air Force Academy. He won the greatest honor that they bestow upon a cadet every year: top student, top athlete.
Wow.
He won that. And so I'm looking at all this stuff on his wall. And so he's got in this frame, it's got Boston Bruins, Boston Garden, and it's framed. I said, what's that? What's that from? And he said, well, that's the first game that Bobby Orr ever played at Boston Garden. And it was a replica ticket that a friend of his got for him.
Wow.
And so here's our brother.
Right.
And I said, were you a Bobby Orr guy? He said, that's why I played defense. And I didn't know that.
Right.
I didn't know that. So,
wow.
So anyway, so I just kind of put it up here. I leave the next morning, go to Tampa, play that night, leave after the game, go to Florida to play the Panthers. And so as I'm coming into the building, my broadcast partner, Sam Rosen, said, Bobby Orr's waiting for you down at the locker room. And I said, great. So away I go. I never pass up that opportunity. So I go down there, we give each other a hug, we chit chat a little bit and get caught up on what's going on in each other's lives. And I said, Bobby, listen, I just got to tell you a story. And so I tell him the story about my brother, Jerry. And I said, I don't like doing this. I said, could you just do me a favor? Could you just give me an autograph so I can give it? And it will make his day. He said, listen, he said, do me a favor. He said, just send me an email. And I said, all right. So, I sent him an email. I told him about our brother and his career and the whole story.
Yeah.
And so about 2 weeks later, I'm back at home. My brother Jerry, our brother Jerry, calls me. And here's this, this tough military guy, right? And he said, you did this, didn't you? Now what happened was his wife, Melanie, calls my wife, Kathy, and they FaceTime. And so now I'm on the phone. I'm talking to Jerry, and Melanie is got this camera going so I can see him. He's talking to me, and he's got this Boston Bruins jersey. and it's inscribed to Jerry. Thank you so much for your service. You're my hero. All of it, something like that. I mean, Bobby Orr.
Wow.
One of his number 4 jerseys. And, here's Jerry, can't even talk.
No,
sure.
No.
but that's Bobby.
That's awesome.
Anyway, that's a long story about Wayne that goes to Bobby, but it just had to tell us.
Hey, Pat, before we move on for a couple more minutes here with Joe, can you tell us about our newest sponsor on Beyond the Pod? That would be Gatherwell.
Yes, I will. Happy to have them. Gatherwell is your drive-through COVID testing medical service, providing you an immediate COVID test result. Gatherwell's lab performs leading antigen testing with comfortable nasal swab using point-of-care analyzers that produce a 96.7 to 99% accurate result within 20 minutes. Gatherwell's drive-through labs are located in Edina, Ham Lake, and Otsego. They've performed well over 10,000 COVID tests that are insurance reimbursable. Gatherwell's is safe, fast, and accurate. Go to gatherwell.com.
All right, Pat, I was going to move on to talking just the current NHL, unless you have another old topic you wanted to get in with him.
There's so many. We could go on, but let's get the NHL since we're hopefully starting up very soon.
Yeah, Joe, of course, is the television analyst for the New York Rangers and also for the NBC Sports Network. And I actually want to talk about the Rangers first, Joe, because they had the number 2 pick 2 years ago. They had the number 1 pick this last year with Lafreniere. You've got obviously Panarin with star power and Zibanejad. They kind of have the recipe for what we've seen in Pittsburgh getting the high draft picks, and Chicago before their run of cups with the high draft picks. Do you see a championship contender from the New York Rangers at some point in the future here?
They're getting close. I mean, these Capo Caco, who just turned 19, he was the number 2 overall pick a couple of years ago, struggled, what you would expect for an 18-year-old kid. He was the only Finnish player on the team. He came over, he has a few physical issues, so he had to be careful there. But here's the thing about him. When the playoffs started, he was one of the Rangers' best players. And you guys know, you play sports, when the playoffs start, right?
Yeah.
Who plays and who doesn't?
Game.
So he does. So he's going to be a heck of a player. He's going to be a heck of a player. Lafreniere, it was crazy the way it worked out, right? And then, they get the ball after the guy drops it on the floor, and then, Theorists started. The way they talk about him is that he's not going to be Gretzky, Crosby, McDavid, but he's the next notch just below that, you know. And so it's really been interesting to see the Rangers. They get to the Stanley Cup final in 2014 and lose to LA. So they had a run of about 6 or 8 years there where they were good every year. Conference finals, they were always a team that you would consider had a chance to win the Stanley Cup. Henrik Lundqvist in goal, you go down the rest of it. So 3 years ago, I think they were 4 or 5 points out of a playoff spot. And the owner, Jim Dolan, summons Glenn Sather, the general manager, Jeff Gorton, who was assistant general manager at the time, the coaching staff. We had just landed He summons them. He has a helicopter ready to take them to his office. They have a meeting, and the meeting was short. He said to them, he said, does this team have a chance to win the championship? Not make the playoffs, win the championship.
Yep.
And they said no. They said, we've been trying all these years. We give up first round picks. We give up prospects. We keep, we're so close, and so now you don't have much in the cupboard, nothing, in the minors, nobody coming up. But you had a group of veterans that were really good players. Rick Nash and McDonough, who everybody in Minnesota knows.
Yep.
And so they just said, he said, I don't care about making the playoffs. A lot of small market teams do because of the revenue. And he said, I don't care about the playoffs. He said, I care about winning.
Yep.
So he said, let's start the process. He said, I want to build a team that can win a championship. So that's what they started. And they're only 4 or 5 points out. And it's about 2 weeks before the trade deadline. They sent a letter to the fans. And they says, here's what we're going to do. Some of your fan favorites are not going to be here. And they started wheeling and dealing, and away they went. Prospects, draft picks. And so now they built this thing. And you know what? They've gotten fortunate. They had to get a little luck to get the number 2 overall pick and the number 1 overall pick.
Yeah.
I look at it as the hockey gods smiled on them because they never threw in the towel. Like Buffalo did a few years ago to try to get McDavid. I mean, they totally threw in the towel. Toronto did too, but they just disguised it well. And Toronto ended up with,
Matthew.
Matthew drafting him. And so anyway, the Rangers just kept on playing and playing and playing. And so did they get lucky to get these guys? Yes, they did. And now Lundqvist is gone. They've always drafted good young goaltenders. So and they got Fox on defense and Lindgren, who's another Minnesota kid who's great. So
Brady Shea.
They've got they're on the verge of being really, really good.
Let's talk about the Wild's offseason, because they are also overhauling this roster pretty good. This offseason, they traded Eric Stahl to Buffalo for Marcus Johansson. They traded Devin Dubnyk to San Jose, Luke Cunnin to Nashville for Nick Bonino and some picks. They also signed Cam Talbot in free agency. What's kind of your impressions from afar of the changes made in Minnesota?
I love it. I do. I mean, I love it. I've known Billy Guerin a long, long time. And I was so happy that he got the opportunity, and my son-in-law, Mike Madano, who there's something about Hall of Fame players, and I say that, and not just because of Mike, but he's one of them. That when I do a game, especially a playoff game, and I finish it, and I'll call Mike. And I'll say, what'd you think of the game? And he gives me 2 sentences of something I didn't see. And I just go, yeah, you're right. And so they see it differently than the rest of us. And that's why they were who they were. And so to see Mike and Billy working together, and Billy had paid his dues to be who he is and become who he is. And listen, that team made the playoffs, but they were never close to being good enough to win. Never. They weren't. And and they needed, they need something to start changing. They need some young players like the Rangers have gotten. So, they've got some issues with contracts, and that made the job and makes the job tough for Billy. But Billy's a leader. He knows what it takes to win a Stanley Cup. He's an honest guy, and I love what they're doing. He's not afraid. He's not afraid. Why sit back and okay, do we make the playoffs? And who cares? Okay, people in Minnesota deserve a championship, and that's the way he looks at it. That's the way Mike looks at it. That's the way Craig Leopold, who I admire greatly, but Craig just loves everybody. He wants to treat everybody well. So he needed Billy to get in there and say, "We'll treat them well, but I'm going to trade some of the guys that you like." I'm going to move some. I got to make these moves because I want to win a championship for you and the fans of Minnesota. So I love what they're doing. I love what they're doing. You know, get some of those young kids in there, give them, you know, let them provide some life. And you don't know how good these young kids are unless you give them a chance.
Right.
You know, you can't just keep them down on the third and fourth lines. You got to give them an opportunity to see if they can be great. And so I really like what they're doing.
They made a change in goal. Excuse me. Trading Devin Dubnyk to San Jose and signing Cam Talbot as a free agent from Calgary. Mm-hmm. For the people who don't know about Cam Talbot, you've seen him an awful lot. What early thoughts on Cam and Minnesota signing him?
Well, first and foremost, what the people are going to find out about Cam Talbot as a person, he's fabulous. I got to know Cam when he was undrafted.
Yep.
Played. He was a kid that grew up in Toronto.
Yep.
And was one of those kids that could have ended up on either side of the tracks and needed something positive for him to happen. And so he got a chance to go play in Alabama.
Yep.
And that kind of turned his life around a little bit. And so the Rangers signed him as an unrestricted free agent because they saw something in him. And Cam Talbot and Benoit Allaire, who's I think I think he's the best goaltending coach in the National Hockey League and has been for a long time. They had a conversation. Cam played in the All-Star game his first year in the minors for Hartford, and Benoit Allaire and Cam had a conversation, and Benoit asked him, "What do you want to do? If you want to continue to be an all-star in this league, you can be. But if you want to play in the National Hockey League, you got to change." And he said, "Tell me what I need to do." And so he worked at it, became Henrik Lundqvist's backup. And then Henrik Lundqvist had an injury that he ended up missing a couple of months. If you remember, the back of his neck, he burst a blood vessel when his head snapped back.
Yep.
And so here's Cam Talbot, New York, Madison Square Garden, has now got to be the guy. And he's never been the guy other than college hockey. And he went through a 2-month period of, I think he was 16-2-2, something crazy numbers. They had to trade him because he was going to become a free agent. And so they made the trade to Edmonton. Had some real good years there, had an off year. He's trying to get back. I think he was closer last year. He had a good season last year. But this is a guy that'll work and try and do whatever he can to be the number one guy. And that's what you're going to get out of him. And when he's playing at his best, he can be a top goaltender.
Joe, we really appreciate your time today. We probably could go hours and hours with you, but really, we're going on 1 hour right now, so we might have to have you on before the NHL season begins, if it ever begins.
Yep.
I hope so. It was such a pleasure. It always is. Yeah. And I appreciate you guys having me on. So thanks, Pat. Love you.
We appreciate you too, Joseph. Thank you.
All right, Joe, so much.
Thank you, Joe. You're the best. Really appreciate it. Joe Micheletti is the analyst for the New York Rangers and for NBC Sports Network, and my favorite Micheletti brother.
Well, that's okay. Good. We had an easy day today.
Yeah, we don't
talk.
You just had to listen.
I know.
It's like a conversation with my wife. You just listen.
Yeah, exactly. Great story. And, it was great.
Pat, we'll talk to you next week. We'll probably have some World Juniors to preview next week on Beyond the Pod.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brandon.
Right. Thank you, Pat. He's Pat Micheletti. I'm Brandon Mileski. This has been another episode of Beyond the Pod, brought to you by Soda Stick and Gather Well. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week right here on Beyond the Pod.